Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming to this week's episode of the Refold Podcast. My name is Clayton, also known as George Big, and I manage the community here at Refold. Today's guest is Georgie Hustlehard from the Korean Always podcast. He lives and goes to school full time in Korea, and he has a lot to say about life in Korea. All right. Cool. So it's great to finally have you on. You go by Georgie Hustlehard on
Yeah.
Discord,
hmm
and your name is George.
Yeah, George. Yeah.
So, George, nice to meet you. I also go by George, but
Yeah.
that's not my given name,
Oh,
unfortunately.
really? Oh, okay.
Um,
Yeah.
now,
I'm great.
do you want to introduce yourself? Who are you? What is your
Sure.
relationship with the language learning community? Talk a
Yeah,
little bit
sure.
about some of your projects.
Yeah, sure. So, right now hi, yeah, everyone. I'm George. Right now, I'm living in Korea, Seoul, specifically, and I've been living here for about, I could say, 2 years. So, I actually spent 1 year and a half here, um, like sort of full time doing university, and then there was a period where I kind of went back and forth from the UK. But yeah, my total time in Korea is about 2 years living by myself. I'm still only 20 years old, so I'm still quite young. Got a lot to learn. But currently, what I'm doing in Korea is I'm studying at the university, pursuing my degree, all in Korean, and I've been learning Korean for about 3 years, which we can dive sort of deeper into that, as we go out through this episode. But yeah, for the most part, I mean, if you can tell, I'm already from my accent. I'm British, so there's that. And I came to Korea when I was about 18, 19 years old. So I just graduated from high school, and then I came straight to Korea to pursue university, and I've just been improving my Korean ever since. But I think that's basically what I want to say. Also, my tag name is Georgie Hustlehard on like most of my social medias, and that is also because I like to do filmmaking and video editing. So my side sort of passion from Korean is video and film. So that's another thing that I've been pursuing in Korea, which I didn't pursue beforehand. So yeah, I think that's a brief enough introduction.
All
Um,
right.
yeah.
Yeah. So, you have a YouTube channel and a
Mhm.
podcast, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's true.
And do you want to go ahead and tell us about your YouTube channel and your podcast a little bit?
Sure. So for the YouTube channel, I have my own personal channel, which is the English name is George in Korea, and that's what I've stuck with for now. I might change in the future. I'm not entirely sure. But the sort of content that I'm uploading is mostly beforehand. It was like language learning based, so Korean updates, how to learn Korean, and it's not to say that I've stopped that now, but I'm also branching out into more sort of just trying to provide value. So things that I've learned in books or any sort of like self-improvement things that I think that can help other people. I've been producing those videos in Korean with English subtitles as a kind of way to not only practice my Korean, but just spread sort of some value and positivity to the world. So there's that, and then the podcast is something I do with my friend Adamola, who featured on a previous episode, which you may have seen. Apparently got a lot of views, so yeah, that's one you might have seen. And we talk about Korean language learning specifically. So the reason I don't upload too much about Korean language learning on my main channel is because we're trying to keep the podcast as the sort of outlet for that. And the name of the podcast is Korean Always Podcast. So yeah, if you're interested, you can have a look. And I think we started the podcast maybe a year ago, just based on the fact that I was really good friends with Adamola, who I met through the Refold community. We met on Refold, and actually wasn't directly through Refold, but we were both in Refold, and we met through Discord. Yada yada yada. But we became really good friends on there, and ever since I've actually been really lucky to have that sort of partner who can that accountability partner for Korean learning. Like I know a lot of people try and learn languages on their own, and I mean, like, most of the time I was spent immersing on my own, but it's really good to have someone else who can be at that similar stage as you. I know for Adamola, he started only a few months after I had done, so we're really at that similar stage, and we've just kind of gotten to this 3 year mark where I'm at now at a similar pace, which has been really something valuable. And so because of that, we decided to do something with our knowledge and share it through a podcast medium, which everyone else can enjoy. So that's the podcast, yeah, my channel.
Right. That's pretty cool. I would agree. The sort of, I don't know, I guess it's irony, right? The ironic
Yeah.
thing about the immersion method,
Mm.
MIA Refold, is that it can be a little bit isolating, if we're
Mm.
stuck in our room reading books and watching K-dramas all day.
Right,
But
right, right.
language is sort of an inherently social thing at the
Mm.
end of the day.
True.
So it's kind of ironic that it's so isolating to be an immersion
Mm.
learner when language itself is very social. So I
Mm.
imagine having somebody there with you was pretty cool. Somebody you could,
Mm.
talk, whenever my main language is Filipino, and I
Okay.
have very few people I can talk to about the bad novels that I read in Filipino
Yeah.
and the teleserie, which are the Filipino version of, dramas.
Okay. Yeah.
And I imagine it sort of it lifted some of that burden, having somebody to sort of talk with
Mm.
and watch shows with and discuss. And
Certainly. Yeah. I mean, I can get into that. So, obviously, I know Adamola himself. He has like a lot of brothers and a lot of family, like physically in person that he does language learning with, and he told me about how he immerses with other people, etc., etc. He tried all these amazing things. Whereas I don't have any brothers and sisters and stuff, so I was sort of on my own and living in Korea on my own as well, without any other people around me. So there was a lot of, yeah, like we said, isolation, and I think most of this isolation comes from the fact that the best way to get good at language is through consuming media. But something I've realized now in my sort of third year of doing all this is that media consumption itself, like, it's not, I'm not gonna say it's like necessarily bad, but doing like watching 10 hours of films in English is probably viewed as something that's a bit not very good for your health. And while you're learning Korean, that can be like seen as something that's very good for your progression, and it is good for your progression. But once you get like sort of climb up the ranks and your knowledge becomes broader, it becomes similar to English, where it's like you're doing all this, but you feel like you're missing out. Like the potential gains of watching 10 hours of films versus watching maybe 2 hours a day and then spending the rest on other activities, maybe perhaps using Korean, is much more. It's going to give you much more of a return on investment than, just like being stuck in your room. So I have lately also been trying to sort of kind of not further myself from the internet, but I would say try and reduce the symptoms of internet addiction, which pretty much everyone has in this modern day. So obviously Matt vs. Japan, big guy himself, he really preaches meditation, and that's something I've been doing a lot to try and break away. Which the reason being is because it obviously there's your prefrontal cortex and your amygdala, two parts of your brain, and doing meditation sort of increases activity in the prefrontal cortex, which makes you make better decisions in general, and improves your focus for immersion language learning. So there's really nothing to lose basically in terms of health benefits. So there was that. Actually, one thing I will show you on the camera is I do have a smartphone, but when I'm in Korea, I use a flip phone. So this is a Korean flip phone, which I bought. I don't know if that comes up. But I've been using this just simply for the fact of I'm really anti-social media and anti just not feeling like I'm in control of what I'm doing online. So this is what I use when I'm at school and at university, and it also helps with studying as well, because you're not distracted by a phone and stuff. So that's another
so,
experiment that I
so
did.
my question here for you
Yeah.
is, I personally actually do not have a smartphone. I have a
Oh yeah.
tablet that I use when I'm at home, but when
Okay.
I'm out and I'm out in public, I'm
Mm.
actually not reachable. And I've thought about getting a flip phone or
Mm.
the old style sort of brick phone.
Yeah.
Um, but I do find that I'm very limited to where I go. If I go somewhere new, I don't
Mm.
have GPS, and I'm kind of
Yeah.
I would be worried about getting lost. So, do you find that you're a little bit less adventurous when it comes to like going places, because if you go somewhere you don't have GPS, you're lost? That's the only concern I would have with
Mm.
not having a smartphone.
Honestly, I felt the exact same, and that has been the slight downside, which I've been trying to sort of weigh up. Like, is it really worth not having a GPS? And I haven't found a good practical solution for that. But the lucky thing is that I live in Korea, where public transport is really good, and they do have like a very good sort of signage for everything. So if I were to go to a new place, I could realistically be somewhat okay. It would just be a little bit more convenient because I'd have to be looking, reading out the signs and being very careful with what I do. So yeah, that is the probably biggest downside of doing all that. And plus, like, things like camera as well. Like, obviously I can take my big camera out if I wanted to take pictures, but most people use their smartphones as cameras nowadays. So the camera on the flip phones is obviously not very good. So this, besides buying like a separate sort of portable camera, there is that sort of loss of functionality. But I mean, overall, I still just prefer life this way. I've tried like, having my smartphone, but with like all the apps off. So like no Instagram, no YouTube, all this. And eventually what happens is you end up downloading them again and using them again, and you just kind of break that sort of barrier. Whereas if you don't have a smartphone on you at all, then you can't go back to it, kind of thing. And that has really been useful in terms of at least focusing on my studies as well. So I would
I
recommend
have, not to derail too much, but
it. Yeah,
this is
yeah.
ultimately a language podcast, but
Oh yeah.
I've had awful luck with smartphones.
Mhm.
I had my good smartphone. I got pickpocketed on a train,
Oh wow.
and then
Yeah.
I bought a replacement, and then the replacement after like 6 months hit cement floor,
Oh
and
yeah. Yeah.
it burst. I tried to get it fixed. I spent way too much money repairing it instead of just getting a new one. And then I got scammed with a used one that I
Oh
bought
right.
that it was not actually the inside. The outside looked like the phone that I wanted, but the
Mm.
inside, the specs were all wrong. It was very weak. It had
Oh.
some Indian internal parts.
Okay.
So that's sort of the origin story of why I said, "Frick it, I'm
Mm.
not getting a smartphone again."
Ah.
Um, a lot of bad experiences, but
That's funny.
um, and I don't even have any sort of phone, but I definitely think that I should get one because obviously I'm not reachable if somebody needs me.
Mm, mm.
But I
Yeah.
totally understand. When I go somewhere, I'm totally in the moment. No phone,
Mm,
no
mm,
distraction. It's very nice, so I can get behind that.
totally. Yeah.
Now, to take us back to language
Sure.
stuff,
Yeah, sure.
um, Refold and MIA were
Mhm.
sort of developed by people not in Korea or
Yeah,
not in Japan.
yeah.
And there's sort of the famous story from Matt where he went to Japan in high school and he went like full hikikomori in
Yeah.
his bedroom and like
Mm,
didn't leave. He
mm,
essentially just did AJAT in his bedroom. And I wonder if like going to school in Korea
mm,
and having Korean friends, Korean social circles, that's a little bit
mm,
of a different situation, right? Because you do
mm.
get opportunities to output
Definitely.
and it's sort of a living language. It doesn't just exist in media or on the internet for you. So
Exactly.
what's
Yeah.
that like?
Yeah, so, I will say the connections that I've made in Korean thus far haven't been as deep as the ones that I've been able to make in English, and I think that's just partly that could be due to language ability, but I think it's partly, culture, because I've only
Mhm.
been here sort of maybe like 2 years, right? And there's so many cultural things that you just can't necessarily learn just through media. You have to experience, through being here, and people will like kind of give you lessons along the way, particularly in Korean culture. And I feel like most perhaps Asian culture they do this as well, but they really enjoy telling you about their culture. So, for example, kimchi, for example, like they'll tell you about kimchi, like, oh, do you know kimchi? Do you know what that is? Like they'll tell you about it. But something that's happened on these, several outings and experiences of output is that people will tell me things that I've like already known, that I've already acquired because I've been living here this long. And one of the sort of downsides of being in this sort of social environment as a foreigner is that you're always seen as the new guy. And this comes up quite a lot on the internet, but it is true that you're always seen as like the sort of tourist, the new guy.
It's
And yeah,
it's and
mm,
East Asians in the West experience this too.
right.
It's called being the perpetual foreigner.
Okay. Yeah.
If you've lived in Korea for 8 years,
Mm,
Koreans who do not know you personally
yeah.
are
Yeah.
liable to assume that you're fresh off the boat, as it
Right.
were. Um, and that's definitely one of the downsides of
Mm,
sort of moving to a country that does not get a lot of immigration,
mm, mm, mm.
where even where I'm from in the middle of nowhere in America, we
Right. Yeah.
have a sizable East Asian, Southeast Asian population.
Mm.
Um, I'm from a village of like 280 people,
Oh,
but we
wow.
have yeah, it's a
Yeah.
really small area.
Yeah.
I'm from
Oh,
the middle of nowhere,
okay.
but we do have a city like 30, 40 minutes away,
Mm.
60,000 people, okay size, but we're a refugee center. So we've got
Oh,
people from Africa, we've got people
all
from
over.
North Africa, we've got people from Southeast Asia, we've got people from the Mediterranean. Um, And I feel like in America, it's sort of like I can look at somebody and they can look totally different to me and they can be just as American as I am. Whereas that's
Mm-hmm.
less common in a lot of countries, including
Definitely.
Korea.
Definitely, yeah. I think more so in Korea because Korea is apparently more homogeneous than Japan, as my Korean friend was telling me. Someone was telling me that in Japan they have like I think it's three sort of, I want to say tribes. I don't know how you'd say that in English. I'm trying to think of the word, like groups of people, ethnicities kind of thing. And in Korea they only have one for the whole peninsula. So there's like a real sort of we are Korean, this kind of mindset, even more drilled in than probably most other places. One, because they're one ethnicity, and two, like you said, there's not much immigration. Like it's probably, I think I read the statistics, at least for so 97% Korean, and then the other 3% is foreigners. But within that 3%, like 1% is like Chinese, and then they've got like the US and
South,
other places, and then it's like there's
the
basically really
Southeast Asians who come to work, like in
exactly
Ansan,
yeah
they work in factories and stuff. Yeah.
exactly yeah
So of that, there's probably and I will say, I've lived in 4 or 5 different countries,
oh wow yeah
and I've always felt at home with other Anglos.
oh yeah
It
yeah
doesn't matter whether they're, definitely Americans. We tend to drink a bit less than people from the Commonwealth countries like New
yeah
Zealand, Australia, the UK. There's some differences, as a Southerner, we don't really do the whole banter culture too much. We would,
right
those are fighting words for us. But at the end of the day, we get along well enough.
definitely yeah
And having lived abroad, some of my closest friends have been people from like England and
mm,
such.
mm, mm, mm,
Um, and it's very interesting because not, language is not culture, right? So
mm,
like Korea has a pretty homogenous language culture thing, but
mhm.
English, if you go to like Jamaica or Singapore, the culture is going to be very different than if you're from the home counties in England,
Certainly yeah.
despite speaking English, and that can
Mm,
be all very, very interesting, I think.
definitely yeah
Um,
the whole
do
culture
you,
thing yeah so carry on
as a long term sort of, I don't know, expat or
mm,
immigrant, whatever you want to consider yourself,
mhm.
do you ever sort of get annoyed by being considered fresh off the boat constantly, or constantly
Um,
surprising people when you speak Korean and they're like, "Well, you're so good," and it's like, "Thank you. I was good 3 years ago, and now I'm just trying to live my life." Does it ever
yeah
get annoying?
I wouldn't say it bothers me to the point of like, oh, I hate Korea, like what's going on. But like it's funny you just mentioned that because in the Japanese community, like they always say like, oh, Nihongo Jojo, like you're really good Japanese. They have the exact same phrase in Korean, and it happens all the time. I think it's just a similar cultural thing. But like you just say hello in Korean, and then they'll say you're really good. You're like, wow, you're amazing. And that happens quite a lot. But in terms of annoyedness, only when I speak Korean consistently and they carry on speaking English as if like I don't know any Korean at all. Like kind of, uh, it's a weird
And that's one
situation.
of the that's one
Mm,
of the big sort of differences between Korea and some of the other East Asian countries is
mm,
Korea has a relatively good linguistic proficiency in English. Something like
yeah,
30% of Koreans are at least conversational in
exactly.
English.
Yeah, certainly.
Um, so that's not quite half, but it's a
Mm,
decent amount of Koreans who could, in theory, carry on in English if they wanted
mm,
to.
mm. And also like in terms of in Korean songs, there's so much English like just mixed in there. Like if you go listen to any other, I don't know, K-pop song, whatever, there's almost in every song like English in there somewhere, which is I find quite interesting sometimes when the translations aren't right. Um, but yeah, with the whole English in Korea is a whole sort of topic in itself. But
You know,
I avoid it
I
really.
I love some Korean English.
Oh yeah. Then
Yeah,
anything yeah.
I used to work for sort of an online hagwon type deal.
Okay. Yeah.
And I had students from Taiwan, Japan, and
Mhm.
Korea.
Mm.
And I can remember when I first started working for them a few years ago when I did English teaching. Um, I had a woman who said "projen,"
Okay.
and that's frozen in
Yeah.
a very thick Korean accent.
Yeah.
And just things like that. And I definitely enjoy it. Filipinos also
Mm.
um, do not have the letter F in most
Oh
of their
really?
languages. Yeah.
Uh, but
So they get this, yeah, the same P thing that Koreans have. And
mm, mm.
yeah, just it can be very cute at times. Uh, the pronunciation, and then also sometimes they have Korean English words that are not
Yeah,
used the way English speakers use those English words.
yeah, definitely, definitely. I can't think of one now. I want to be a cool guy. It gives a really cool example, but I
Uh,
can't think of a good
yeah,
one.
I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I
Yeah,
know they exist.
they do. They do.
It was one of the things that we got criticisms for when we made our Korean Anki deck, was
Oh
we
yeah.
actually included Konglish words.
Uh,
And a lot of people were like, "These are just English," but I'm like, "Are they really? They're loan words, but, like,
mm,
they're different, right?" It's,
yeah. You still need to know them. I mean, I just did think of one right now. There's the word for like sort of good luck, like good luck or whatever, is fighting. So that's the Korean pronunciation of fighting, right, in English, but we don't say fighting. But they kind of the idea they've captured there is like, oh, fighting is in like this sort of motion, like good luck kind of thing.
Mhm.
And that's what they captured. But yeah, it comes across as fighting. They say fighting, which is fighting. Good luck. So yeah, there's one that doesn't really add up in English.
Now, in addition to sort of like, I guess, your
Hmm.
normal daily life,
Yeah.
going to school, having the podcast,
Hmm.
um, I've heard that you've, like, sort of ventured out and, like, I hear you've done some street interviews in Korean.
Yeah. Uh,
And how did that go? What's that like, sort of
hmm.
doing, and I guess you're
Yeah.
doing them in Korean with native Koreans, so what's that
Indeed.
like?
Yeah, so I've only done two of those, and this was about a year ago from where I am now. So my Korean wasn't as good as it is now. But yeah, I went to. Honestly, I don't actually remember my real sort of motivations. I think I just wanted to get that one video where I wanted to be that cool guy doing street interviews. I actually do have a friend who does this street interview thing. You might have seen him on YouTube, K Explorer. He does it like full time, and I kind of got sort of inspiration from him. I was like, you know what, I need to do my own. So I did that, and I remember going out there just on the street, and I had like a notepad with me. So I just hold up a notepad, and I wrote on it something like please, or please join my interview, or something stupid like that. And I just had it on my held it up. And what I would do is like I hold it up, and then people would just look at me. So I realized, oh, this isn't going to work. I need to like actually speak. So I would just literally stand there, really nervous, like the most nervous I've ever been in my life, just shaking the whole time, and just be like, hey, excuse me, like stuttering the whole time. Excuse me, would you like to join our interview? And they'd be like, some people would be like, yeah, okay, sure. What is it? I'd be like, oh, just a short thing for YouTube. We're just going to ask you about like life in Korea. And the amount of people that said like, oh yes, okay, it's okay at first, and then ran away was literally like unbelievable. I think I approached about 30-ish people in that one day. I'm talking about the first interview. Approached about a good 30 people, and only we only got 3 people to actually come out and do the interview. So that just shows how, like, you have to, the sort of probability, the sort of numbers, especially in Korea, is quite hard. And I feel like Koreans don't like necessarily being uh, approached, maybe, or I'm not sure what it is. They're quite shy compared to, perhaps if I did an interview in New York, there'll probably be more. I suspect, culturally and stuff, there'll be more interviewees to choose from. It's just some sort of cultural thing. They just don't like being put out there too much. Which is funny because they do care a lot about how they look as well. So another thing, is a slight tangent, but in Korea, there's loads of like sort of photo booths. And if you've ever been to one of these photo booths, which you probably will have if you're a university student, you take a picture, and I can actually show you real quickly. So it's a picture of me right on here, and I don't know if you can see, but my face is kind of been like sort of almost photoshopped, like in the fact they just make it look so much more sort of beautiful, right? But it's
Sort
really
of applies like
unrealistic.
a filter in
Yeah,
the photo booth.
exactly. And that is just kind of standard. You can't take it off, and it's just a normal thing. And it really, really just goes to tell how deeply ingrained this whole lookism is kind of based in society and stuff. So yeah, there's that. Yeah, that's about it.
I can't imagine, yeah,
Mm,
yeah,
mm,
definitely though. I understand there's a lot of, like, plastic surgery and
mm,
lookism and stuff
yeah,
going on.
In fact,
And
the fact you mentioned that, I just want to say another thing. The elder generation in Korea often tells people like how they should live their life. Like, oh yeah, you got to buy that because it's cheaper. Oh, you got to live here because this is like way better. And one of the things that I kind of got attacked with was like, oh George, like you've got some like spots on your face, like you should go to the doctors and get them removed. I was like, oh, thank you very much. Like it's very something you wouldn't just say in the West. And like another thing, like if you see someone who's like slightly overweight in Korea, they just be like, oh hey, you need to like go and lose weight. Like we can't be living like this. Like there's a lot of pointing fingers regarding how someone looks, which is really I find quite funny because I'm not too offended by it because I'm able to be removed and enjoy it, but some people might get upset.
Yeah. I've never been to Korea proper, but I've been to the Koreatown in Makati, Philippines, and
Oh
also
yeah,
K-Town, Los Angeles.
wow.
And the thing about these diaspora Koreans, they
Yeah.
tend to have immigrated during like the 70s and the 80s.
Mm.
And I feel like even just with the diaspora, there's this cultural gap. The sort of the Korean diaspora I've met, the older folks, they always seem kind of grumpy, kind of
Yeah.
like kind of stingy, kind of
Mm.
grumpy, kind of always like mildly irritated at just
Mm.
existence in general.
Yeah.
And I've heard from just chatting with some of them that if they don't keep up with Korean slang,
Mm.
apparently it changes very quickly.
Mm.
So there's a bit of a linguistic gap as well.
Yeah. Well,
And
the generational gap in Korea is like some of the biggest you can ever see
oh
ever.
yeah,
Like
because
you'll see it.
right after the Korean War,
Mm.
Korea was poorer than like most of Africa.
Mm, 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 mm,
It's sort of a miracle that it went from a very poor country to one of the Asian tigers. So I can
mm, mm,
imagine it's sort of like being raised in two different countries, if
mm, mm.
you're older and then if you're younger.
Yeah, actually, I can speak a bit more on that because there's this sort of family which I met in Korea. I got invited to someone's house, which basically, long story short, I spoke to the delivery lady in my elevator, and we were just chatting up, and she invited me around for dinner. So I'm like, all right, fine. And we're just talking, and she was saying that how when she grew up, they wouldn't have enough things to eat, so they would like literally get like bark off the trees and like be eating that as a meal. And it's funny you see that because you see them living like sort of fairly okay now, and this is only like a 50-year-old woman, 40-year-old woman, and it's really kind of mind blowing to see that sort of gap between, for example, if someone was a 40-year-old woman in the UK would not have been expected to be like that poor, but in Korea seeing someone like that is just kind of really kind of touches your heart when you see stuff like that.
I think there's a height difference too. I think older
Mm,
Koreans are like pretty short, whereas
yeah,
Koreans who are closer to our age, 20, 30,
mm,
are quite tall, actually, some of the
yeah,
tallest in East Asia.
certainly because there's the difference in nutrition. And Korea
Mhm.
is kind of health crazy as well. Like they do love all these vitamins and make sure you do your exercises kind of.
The funny thing is, all the Korean food I've had, I would say, is like not healthy. Like,
Oh yeah.
I used to live in a compound sort of that had a lot of Korean diaspora, and like I
Mm.
had like army soup, and it's
Okay.
just like instant noodles and spam, and like uh,
Right.
they
Not
they
good.
really like pork belly, like the belly of the
Mm,
pig, like
right.
samgyeopsal.
With something like
Um,
that. Yeah.
and like
Wow.
this doesn't seem super healthy to me, the Korean food that I've had. But again, I've only had like the junk food, I guess. I'm sure
Yeah.
that there are healthy dishes out there.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of Korean food, a lot of Korean food has what they call guk, which is like soup. So pretty much almost standard with every meal, there's going to be some sort of soup which you have to drink. And I think the main difference between Western food and Korean food, in fact, I mean, it might be other countries in Asia, I'm not entirely sure, but at least with Korean food, you pretty much always have soup or some sort of thing to drink, which is really like kind of uncommon in the West. Like the only time we would have soup is if we're literally drinking just soup or cereal kind of thing. Like we don't consider it as food per se. Whereas in Korea, like the water or the soup is kind of standard. And the reason for this is because during the poor times, a lot of their dishes were made using this water because it fills you up without like actually needing the materials, because they were lacking in the sort of resources to make like a full dish. So they were like, all right, well, how can we feed as many people as possible whilst, you know, saving our resources? And the answer was having more sort of broth and soup. So yeah, there was that. But in terms of healthiness, bibimbap is like the sort of probably most reputable healthy dish in Korea.
That's
It's
a
literally
rice bowl type
rice,
thing, right?
yeah, rice bowl with just vegetables basically,
Mhm.
and sort of raw meat and stuff. They're all just mixed in there with an egg, you know, seaweed. There are different variations, but that is like probably the number one sort of healthy go-to thing. And I think for the most part, eating out anywhere is never going to be like as healthy as cooking stuff by yourself. But if you do some exploring, there are healthy options, yeah. But a lot of like the sort of representative foods are, yeah, not necessarily healthy, like, you know, ramen and I say ramyeon in Korean word, and like samgyeopsal, like you said, these kind of
Yeah, when I think
yeah.
of Korean food, I mean, I think of like kimchi, which is kind of healthy. Um,
That's true.
I've actually always preferred sauerkraut because the
Okay.
kimchi, I'm very sensitive to seafood. I'm from an inland state,
All
and
right.
I
You
didn't
don't
grow up
have.
eating fish. And a lot
Right.
of kimchi I've had, you can really taste like the shrimp paste that they put in it.
Oh yeah.
And people think I'm crazy. They're like, "Oh, it doesn't taste fishy." I'm like,
Yeah, I
"Tastes
don't know about that. Yeah.
tastes fishy to me." A
Oh
lot of the
yeah.
kimchi I've had has shrimp paste in it, and it just
Mm,
makes it too fishy for me. I
yeah.
guess, um, but I'm a big
Honestly.
fan of the Korean food that I've had. I definitely like spice.
Mm,
Um,
mm.
I sometimes get like I make fusion cuisine. Like I will cover chicken in gochujang or whatever, and then I'll cook it. And like
Oh
I'm very
wow. Yeah.
happy. I'm very happy with the
That's really good.
spice.
Oh, that's quite sort of diverse sort of cooking thing you got going on there. Yeah. Like
Oh,
you seem to know a lot more about Korea than I expected.
oh, well, thank you.
Yeah.
Um,
The sort of thing I was going to get at, it was last point was here. The Korean food is always more, I forgot the word for this in English, but more kind of hitting the senses kind of thing. Like it's more triggering, if you will, than sort of less sort of plain English food, at least. So Eastern England, we have a lot of plain food, and the reason for that,
oh
I
yeah.
don't know what the reason for that is, but people say it's like not very tasty. Whereas in Korea, everything is like wow, like
I
what was it?
actually I
You
don't
know?
I don't know if this is true.
Mm.
But I've heard it was sort of due to rationing after World War II.
That could be
I
the
don't
case.
I don't know if that's true, but that's sort of the folk reason that I have heard, where
Oh
like
yeah.
because of the rationing, people just didn't have, spices and stuff, and it was sort of the blandification of British food. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I've
Um,
heard.
it sounds about right. I mean, you're educating me in my own country, so I don't actually know the real reason. But I'm a big lover of, you know, plain food. Like, just give me, you know, bread and butter, and then that's, you know, job done kind of thing.
I am very much a Southern American.
Yeah.
My family is like, I've got family from Louisiana, which is very
Mm.
spicy food. We
Uh,
like, rice and gravy and
oh
spicy
wow.
sauces, and
Mm.
definitely cannot. I get complaints from people when I cook because I use a lot of aromatics when I cook.
Uh,
So things that smell very strong. I've been told it
mm.
smells like I'm cooking Indian food because
Oh
I
my
use a lot
goodness.
of aromatics. And yeah, I don't know if I could do British food.
Yeah, that's funny. It's really funny how you know, people have their sort of food preferences as well. Like there's actually, because Korea is very much sort of kind of food-based society. Like the way they greet people is asked, like, "Have you eaten yet?" I think that's the same for other Asian countries, but
A lot of
yeah,
Asian countries do that, yeah.
oh, that is
I've seen
a
it.
big
I've
difference.
seen it in Indonesian. I've seen it in Filipino.
Oh wow,
It's
yeah.
definitely a thing in Chinese as well.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
in some cases, in some cultures, it can be seen as a little flirty. Like a girl might say, "Oh, Georgie, have you eaten yet?" And
yeah.
it's sort of a little bit of a flirty way of greeting a
Ah, yeah.
person. And in some cultures, it's not. But in
Mm,
general, I've noticed there's definitely sort of a tendency to greet people
yeah.
with "Have you eaten yet?" in East and Southeast Asia for whatever
Mm.
reason.
So it isn't just Korea, huh? Mm. Because the sort of just culture of like make sure there's like a thing in Korea, like make sure you've eaten 3 meals a day. Like that's just the thing that an old person will ask you. It's like, oh, have you eaten your 3 meals? Like, what do you have for breakfast? Like they like to go in on food. And the one thing in Korea which is kind of annoying or not foreigner friendly is whenever you go to eat something with a Korean person, more so the older generation, but they will tell you how to eat the food. So let's say,
Oh, yeah.
whatever, I'm trying to eat it like a normal person, and they'll be like, no, you got to dip it in this. Hey, try this. And they're always like, try this, try that, eat it like this, eat it like that. And as sort of a Westerners perspective, it's like, don't tell me how to eat my food. Like, I'm just trying to enjoy my meal. But that's something that kind of bothered me in the start, and now I've come to like sort of understand and be more mindful. But
I can totally relate to that.
yeah,
So where I'm from, we put our fork in our right hand and
yeah.
usually a knife in our
Oh,
left hand.
that's
Um, and in some parts of Asia where they don't use chopsticks, they use
yeah.
spoon and fork. And
Mhm.
because they have so much rice, it's usually spoon in right hand, fork in left hand.
Right.
And I had it backwards, and I've had people when I've been in different places in Asia scold me for holding my spoon in the wrong hand. I'm like, does it really matter at the end of the day?
Yeah.
Um, and these things are very cultural. You need to try this dip. You need to eat it like this. You need to put
Mm,
this in the soup.
mm, mm,
And
mm,
I don't know. I'm getting outside of my wheelhouse here, but at
mm.
least in America, we have very big houses. So
Yeah.
we have people over and we have cookouts and we like hang out on the patio or on the
Right.
porch or they come into the house.
Mm, mm.
Asia tends to be very densely populated, so I feel
Yeah.
like a lot of the it's more they're more into third spaces like bars or going
Mm.
and having hot pot or Korean
Exactly.
barbecue, and
Yeah.
the social activities tend to be more food focused and outside of the house. Does that track for you with your
I would say
experience in Korea?
that makes 100% sense. Yeah, people don't often invite you to your house. It's kind of like a sort of not breach of privacy, but it's like a big sort of step if you can go to a Korean person's house. Yeah, it's like a sort of wall that like a area you shouldn't be going to unless you're really close, kind of thing. Like not you can't just go into anyone's house. Like an example in the UK as well, we have like a sort of culture for knocking for people. So when you're a kid, you go knock on someone's door
Also a
and
store.
like, I'll come play. Whereas in Korea, they don't, as far as I'm aware, they don't have that because it's just going to other people's houses. It's just not. It's like a whole different dimension. Yeah. So yeah, culturally.
I grew up with a very social family,
Mm.
and I also had my parents had a business at home that they ran out of our house.
Oh wow.
So I
Yeah.
was always used to having people at my house. And
Mm.
uh, where I'm from, the people are kind of clannish. We all stick together, and it's like big extended families all live together. Or like on the same street. Like on my street, I had
Mm.
aunts and uncles who were like 2 houses down, 3 houses down, and that's just how people where
Wow.
I'm from are. It's small town.
Mm, mm, mm. Really
And
small.
I
Mm.
never really got into, people would just drop by. You'd
Mm.
you'd be doing something, you'd be having your lunch, and you'd look at the door, and your uncle has walked into the door, and that's just typical for. So I can get behind maybe not knocking, on someone's door in the middle of the
Yeah.
day because they might have other plans.
I mean, there's that, but it's the thing I kind of miss is that sort of sense of community as well. Like I think it's because I'm living as a foreigner here. Whereas if I was a Korean, I'd probably still have like my family and I'd be sort of okay. But yeah, living as a foreigner, there's sort of I'm living just on my own, sort of atomized from the world in my apartment. And sometimes I think, oh yeah, it would be nice, to have friends over and stuff, or go to a friend's place just to get that kind of sort of social connection, which you can only really
Are
get.
you able to get sort of a proper friend circle like you would have back in the UK?
Yeah,
Or are
so
you finding it hard?
I'm finding it hard actually. To be completely honest, I have like one sort of good friend at university, but in terms of like being able to mix with people, I haven't had sort of like I've got my friends like from here and there, but I don't have like a good social circle kind of thing. I don't have a group of friends, if that makes sense. So I've got a lot of like individual sort of relationships, but I've never been able to sort of get into a group, which I think is not necessarily because I'm a foreigner in Korea and because blah blah blah. But I think it's just more my personality. Because I do know, like Adamola, for example, he seemed to be a lot more sociable than me as a person anyway. And then when he came to Korea, he was able to what it sounds like have like bigger sort of social circle than me. And I think it just comes down to person, not necessarily me not being able to speak Korean or know the culture kind of thing. I hope so anyway. So yeah. But I mean,
Yeah.
I'm doing things to work on that, trying to work my social skills and all that. So I'm not like, oh, I'm so sad, oh, I'm lonely and stuff. But it's something
Yeah,
that
you don't
work
sound
with.
bitter about it,
Yeah, no, like I'm quite a fairly antisocial person anyway, so I think it's just more my personality kind of thing. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah. But it's interesting to compare. I've been an expat in a couple different places, and
Mm.
I can say that in Asia, I found it very hard as well.
Mm,
Whereas
mm,
when
mm.
I lived in Latin America and I lived in
Yeah.
the Anglo Caribbean, um, I found it much easier.
Mm,
Um,
mm.
the Anglo Caribbean was very, very easy, obviously, because we kind of share a culture.
Yeah.
And in Latin America, they're just you sort of have the opposite problem where it's easy to have a large circle of kind of friends, and
Yeah.
it's hard to have like a
Real.
smaller circle of really, really close friends.
Mm,
Um,
mm.
so yeah, it's just cultural and
Yeah. I think also
you know,
cultural in terms of Korea is like you just said, the Korean friends that you do make tend to be like your friends like for a very long time. Like they don't just kind of do the sort of light, oh yeah, I'll just be your friend kind of thing. Like the most of the connections, or at least it's the ones that count, are sort of very long lasting as far as I found. So that's why it's probably harder to get closer to the people at first because they know they've got to like sign up for this sort of longer
some
lasting
people
friendship.
have been burned. Some people
Yeah.
have made friends with foreigners, and then the
Mm.
foreigner leaves after a year.
Right,
And I
right,
think
right.
that can be off-putting, and especially if, like, even if you have plans to stay in Korea for the rest of your life, people don't
Mm.
know that.
Yeah.
They might think you're there for 1 year or 2 years and then you're gone. And I
Mm,
think
mm.
that can make some people apprehensive too.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. Because you have to kind of get to that stage of knowing each other before you can say, "Oh yeah, I'm actually going to be here a long time." Yeah,
Mhm.
mm, makes sense. Totally.
Now, uh, back to Korean and the language and stuff a bit.
Hmm.
I was talking to Cloudy, maybe you know
Yeah,
him,
I know him. Yeah,
and I figured you did because I think he moderates your Discord server,
yeah.
maybe.
We had him on
Um,
a podcast episode. That's how I sort of got to know him properly. But yeah,
all right,
yeah.
perfect. He mentioned that you were on a couple of there were some like very popular live streamers, and
Yeah,
you sort of crashed their live streams.
that's
And how did tell us about that a little bit?
yeah.
He sounded like he was interested in having you talk about that. So
Okay. Yeah, yeah, okay. So there is a live streamer in Korea, probably the biggest sort of gaming YouTuber in Korea, and his name is Uwakut, which is I don't know how that translates, but like he is probably the most popular streamer, and he uploaded on his community page one day on his YouTube channel, and I was just watching it, and it said, "Are there any foreigners that watch my channel? Please, use the Google form and sign up. Blah 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 blah. We might have a special episode." So I was like, "Oh yeah, I've got nothing to lose. Like, why the hell not?" And I was in the UK at this time, like sort of visiting, and I just signed up without any real thought. And next thing I know, I actually get an email back from him saying, "Oh, congratulations, we'll have you on our show." I was like, "Oh, really? Wow, damn, okay." So this YouTuber, his sort of niche, I guess, is virtual YouTube. So he doesn't actually show his face. So no one knows what he looks like, and he uses VR chat as his
okay.
kind of sort of stage, if you will, for all his content. So it's all kind of like animated, and you have your own avatar, blah 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 blah. So I chose an avatar, and I went on his show, and so he had a group of about like I think it was like 15 to 20 foreigners who watched his channel, and he just did like a quiz show kind of thing, and we were all lined up, blah blah blah, and I'm in this game, and I'm speaking to this man who has like maybe 1 million subscribers plus or something in Korean, and we just lined up there, and he picks me up first. It's like, "Hey, like, where are you from?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm from the UK, blah, blah, blah." And I was just so nervous that I didn't even speak like properly. And eventually, there's actually like a whole recording of this on my YouTube channel. If you go down, scroll down at the bottom, there's like a sort of just recording of what happened during that live stream. But it was a really good experience. I was able to meet, YouTubers and just have conversations with people, which even Korean people don't get to have conversations with. So that was one instance of like a sort of live streaming thing. Other instances, I've been able to. So there's another guy. I don't know if I can say his name. I'll just say it and then maybe we can censor it. But his Korean YouTube name is Dick Hunter on YouTube. It's literally called Dick Hunter, and
Okay.
his other alter ego name is durian, which is like a Korean fruit. And
Is
I went on
that durian, like the little
yeah,
spiky fruit?
yeah. I guess
Okay.
yeah.
It's
There you
an
go.
English, durian in English. It's
Right. I just said yeah.
smells really bad. It smells
Right,
awful.
right. Yeah.
Do you like it? Just not to just to go into it. To
I
me, it
don't think
tastes like garlic flavored yogurt. I don't like it.
that's the thing. I don't think I've tried it. That's the
Okay.
thing. That's why I
Some
just
people are
thought,
crazy for it, but to me, it tastes like yogurt if yogurt were flavored with garlic. It's not a very
oh,
pleasant
no, okay.
experience
Maybe
to
I'm
me.
with it. I don't know. I might try. But yeah, so I got onto. I was just watching one of his live streams one day, and I was just chatting in chat just as an opposite place, and I said something like, "Oh yeah, by the way, I'm a foreigner." The random thing, and he actually read it. He's like, "Oh wait, really? Like, where are you from? Where are you from?" He's like, "Can you get in a call?" So I got on a Discord call with this guy who's like, again, like got 1 million subscribers just purely off the fact that I said I was a foreigner and he wanted to talk. And we just had like a really brief conversation. We were talking, blah, blah, blah. It's like, oh, where are you from? How do you learn Korean? Blah, blah, blah. And again, just experiences like that just wouldn't have happened beforehand. And then also someone else was watching this stream, by the way. Someone else was watching a stream who was also a streamer, saw me and then wanted to talk to me and then ended up having like a meal with them. And it's just like kind of the ways into meeting celebrities is like kind of really leveled up if you know some good Korean. Outside of this as well, other celebrities. When I did my sort of filming stuff, I filmed for there's a rapper called Swings in Korea who's quite famous, and it was his birthday party, and I ended up being able to sort of be the guy filming at his birthday party event. And alongside this, whenever you go to these sort of events, there's always other celebrities as well. So I was just meeting loads of people just purely based on the fact of just putting myself out there, really. So the best advice for anyone who's trying to meet their favorite K-pop star or whatever is to put yourself out there. And I've just said this, sorry, really sort of the most mind-blowing one of them all was 2016. I was on holiday in Korea and I didn't really pretty much know Korean at the time. I think I could introduce myself. And I was just here on holiday. And I was here with a Korean friend of mine who happened to know the producer of, I think it was NBC Studio. And in NBC Studio, they shoot this program, which is called Weekly Idol, which is very kind of popular in Korea. And they have sort of K-pop idols on every sort of week. And it just so happened that we were going there whilst they were filming that. And I went there. And there's a K-pop group called ITZY, who are like really famous now. But before they'd even like sort of debuted, I was in the recording studio and I managed to meet these people who were like literally like top tier celebrities now. And like thinking back, just really putting yourself out there, and you can meet quite a lot of people if you're lucky enough. So yeah, that's about.
So the
it.
takeaway from that is put yourself out there,
Yeah,
and you'll meet people.
yeah, basically. Put yourself out there. Don't be shy. Don't be afraid to output. This is my philosophy.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if the whole output phobia happens because a lot of people are sort of immersing by themselves, and I wonder if you sort of got around that by going to school in Korean and having
Yeah.
to use the language and then having friends in the language.
One thing I did do, which I was fortunate enough to do, so a lot of people use iTalki and stuff. I did have a Korean tutor for about a month or two, maybe 2 to 3 months, I think, where I would literally just, even though at the time I thought, oh, output's bad, like I shouldn't be outputting. I just didn't really care. I just wanted to have some sort of progress. So someone who could like sort of, give me some feedback and I could look back on my progress. So I did, for once a week, I did an hour of just talking sessions. And I think that didn't necessarily improve my sort of output ability in terms of like actual skill, but I think it improved my sort of confidence. And just having that one person to talk to once a week, maybe when you're at like the sort of 1.5 year mark, like once you've got enough input to actually be doing this, I think can be sort of beneficial in terms of getting your mind in the right place. Like not necessarily from a language learning, like, oh, this is going to be the most efficient for my learning, but in some cases it can be if you're sort of changing your mind to be more able to output. So there was that. And then obviously going to university, of course, you have to output. So yeah, that's basically been my output experience. I think output is never going to be easy. Like you said, once you're just sitting indoors all day and not doing anything, but even just putting yourself out there on text. So just like writing a message to the YouTubers or writing a message in streams or sending an email to someone just for the sake of it. You'll be surprised by how much you get back. Like that's just kind of life in general. Like even in English, like if I send an email to 20 people and only one person gets back, that's still a massive win for me in my point of view. So yeah, putting yourself out there, nothing to be lost really. Yeah.
Yeah, getting used to that was one of the biggest things for me is when we shifted the podcast over, because it used to be me and two other Refold employees,
Right.
and people would come on occasionally, but a lot of episodes where people just would suggest a topic and then the three of us would talk about it. And switching over to this interview style, I've had to get used to reaching out to people,
Yeah.
and sometimes they get back to me, sometimes they get back to me and they say no, and sometimes they get back and they say yes, and then sometimes those yeses are true. A lot of them, people say yes and then they never actually follow up.
Yeah. It's
But
hard,
getting
isn't it?
used to that sort of rejection, if you can
Mm,
call
mm.
it that,
Yeah.
is definitely something that's worth doing, I think, in life.
Definitely, and that's only something I've only realized this sort of lately. Like I know I was talking about how I like, oh yeah, I kind of put myself out there, etc., etc. But I wasn't doing that necessarily just for. Like, I wasn't thinking about any sort of reward or anything I could get from it. Whereas, like for example, let's say, so you have this Refold podcast, and you're trying to get some interviews in. Like you need to be like, oh, I need to maybe talk to maybe 20 people, and maybe one person will come back to me. In my case, I was just kind of doing it without really thinking, just like, oh, this guy's doing some sort of thing. Like I'll just write a comment, I'll just send an email. But now that I've sort of got more, not necessarily business minded, but just more aware of this whole concept, I've kind of felt the need to do it more so, just based on the fact you can get a lot more from it. Yeah, so it's definitely a good thing to
Yeah.
keep yourself out there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I
Cool.
think older generations may know this, whereas the millennials and the Zoomers,
Yeah.
we seem to be a little bit more apprehensive about it. My
Mm.
mother was a door-to-door salesman when she was,
Wow.
my age, and she definitely had that go get 'em attitude. And I feel like it's common for people in the younger generations to not do that. Um,
It's to do with technology, I think. I mean, we spend all this time, indoors watching, consuming media is like kind of become our main hobby. And thinking back, like obviously consuming media, sorry. Wow, consuming media is always been a thing, but it's not to the extent that it's ingrained in our society now, like social media and all this. And people, say like, oh, don't blame social media, like it's not that big of a deal. I would say it is that big of a deal because it's really, like, think about it. Like when you eat lunch, okay, when was the last time you ate lunch alone without having to watch like YouTube or have some sort of stimulation like music or something? And if you think about it like deep enough, the reason for that is because you kind of feel sort of alone. Like you don't like to just be sitting there eating your food alone. Like you want to have some sort of stimulation, some sort of connection. And I feel like a lot of people kind of dumb down their sort of loneliness with, other.
I think that's why streamers are so popular, actually.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's that parasocial thing, right? Yeah, like people missing out on that connection. And
And I definitely am guilty of, like, I would say 2 out of 3 of my meals a day, because I use Discord for work.
Yeah.
And then I also just am chronically online, for better or worse. I'm
Yeah.
definitely, like, chatting to Discord friends and stuff, or I'm on Facebook. Not
Right.
Facebook usually, just for a couple of older people I know, but, I definitely think you're right,
And our generation,
and
like the younger generation,
yeah.
screwed us
And
up.
I've gotten better as I've gotten older. 10 years ago, I would have been afraid to make a doctor's appointment over the phone, but
Yeah,
now I'm okay with it. So, like, definitely you can grow out of it or
so
learn to cope with it. But there was a time when I was like a new adult, when you start turn 18, 20,
mm,
when like you're like an adult
mm, mm,
for
mm,
the
mm.
first time kind of thing.
Yeah,
And you start making your own doctor's appointments because when you were under 18, your mom did it for you, your dad did
yeah,
it for you.
yeah,
There's definitely a time where I was terrified to have to call,
yeah.
and now I've gotten over it. I make my own doctor's appointments.
Mm.
I send out cold emails to people and beg them to come on my podcast,
Wow,
and
yeah, yeah.
so there's always room for development.
Certainly.
But it's an interesting difference. I
Mm,
agree.
mm,
How big is the whole parasocial streamer
mm.
phenomenon in Korea?
Wow, goodness gracious me. That's probably the best question you've asked this whole episode, because I've got a lot to say on that. So Korean society, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, if you've ever been on a train in Korea, you will not find just one person on their phone, people on their phone. I'm not even joking when I say this. I'm surprised. I'm actually surprised. Like, oh wow, like he's not on their phone. And I see someone not on their phone, I'm generally shocked. That's the sort of level we're at in Korea, because particularly on the trains, it's just some sort of cultural thing that everyone is on their phone. And like, I'm really not lying when I say this. Like, please, if anyone visits Korea and goes on the train, like, please just have a look at how many people are on their phone, and everyone is on the phone, right? So why is that? So obviously social media is actually a lot bigger in Korea than I think in the West, because there's obviously the fear of missing out on all this. But like I said earlier, the focus on lookism, the focus on how someone looks, and the sort of coldness of that has made people become even more invested in social media and more invested in how their presence is online, right? And how they look to other people in real life as well. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is Koreans are very sort of closely sort of knitted together. The Korean word would be like "giri giri" is the phrase they have. Like, they're really sort of, if you're Korean, you're like a real homie. Like, we're the same kind of thing. We're part of the same family kind of mindset that they're in. So, and they also like to have friends. They love their friend groups. So one friend group won't be friends with this friend group for whatever reason, and it's kind of really, they don't see eye to eye. Like, there's a lot of exclusion going on in Korean society, which makes them more susceptible to social media and this thing even more, because they want to be part of their cool group. They want to be the cool kids. They want to, make sure they're looking the best to everyone else around them. And it's really in a competitive society anyway. So they want to get the most likes and all this stuff. So yeah, social media is really just almost made for Korean society. And that's really not so good. But in terms of streaming and parasocial stuff, I think most people aren't aware, but in Korea there is a whole business of what they call yorken, which is female streamers basically. And obviously female streamers, they have that, in the West on Twitch or whatever. But in Korea, the amount of profit and the amount of
it's a whole industry, I bet. I've seen this in China. They have influencer streamer
right
factories. I don't know what you call them, where like the people are trained on how to be an influencer, and they're just lines of women sitting at computers doing e-girl stuff essentially.
That is the same in Korea. I think in Korea it's not as large as the scales like in China, but they definitely do have like companies where like they hire them, they get sort of girls in, and they'll say like, you need to be streaming at this time, be like this, just like this, and there's just a whole
agencies essentially.
It is essentially the same. So and that makes a lot of money, because people in Korea who are constantly on social media the whole time, perhaps the sort of richer people who are finding it hard to fit in socially, etc., and are addicted to the media content online, they have a lot of free cash to spend. And culturally, it's not seen like in the West, we're like, oh, you're a simp, like you're such a simp, whatever. In Korea, simping in that like, so sending a big donation to a female streamer is kind of seen as like, oh, like he must really like respect the streamer, like he must be a real fan. And there's less of that sort of like, oh, you're a simp thing. That's only started to come in as of lately, but for the longest time, that wasn't seen as such like a bad thing, which means that the Korean streamers are making a lot more money, thanks to people being more open to that. So it's wild. I can't really.
Korea has some interesting stuff. When I was younger, they've always sort of been into computers and technology. I used to play like Korean MMOs like Lineage and MapleStory like a long time ago. And it's gotten to the point where like I think for a long time now, it's had to have been over a decade now, if not longer, the Korean identity numbers are registered to accounts, so like people can't play video games at certain times. And totally different relationship, I think, with technology and the internet than in some places.
The internet. So I was going to say the internet itself. So in Korea, whenever you make your phone number, you can't just make a phone number like willy-nilly. You have to bring your ID card. And if anyone doesn't know about Korea, there's also an ID card system. So I'm not sure, they might have it in the US, but in the UK, as far as I'm aware, you just have your passport and that would be your ID. Like there's no other sort of like citizenship card, right?
We have state IDs,
Oh, you
and
do?
we have and we have the passport,
Right,
but we don't have a national ID.
right.
It's a really weird system.
Yeah, so it's weird.
Um,
So yeah, sorry.
and yeah, it can cause problems because some state IDs look fake to other states. Um, and it can definitely cause problems. Like I think New Jersey, they famously have an ID that looks fake, and then they have this program REAL.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
an
yeah.
acronym because the US, we love our acronyms.
Oh, yeah.
And an REAL, all capital ID, is different than just like a lowercase REAL ID. So some people from New Jersey do not have real IDs. So
Yeah.
on their thing, it'll say not valid for real ID purposes, but it's
Alright.
capital REAL. So people from like Kentucky, where I'm from, are like,
Yeah.
this is a fake ID. It's just not a real ID.
No,
And it's like,
for
no, real it's a government
yeah.
program. And it's a whole mess.
Yeah,
I
that is.
definitely would not oppose a foreigner thing. And
Yeah.
and I've been an expat before, and I've had my
Mm.
own, what we call a gaijin card,
Yeah, right.
or alien certificate of
Yeah,
registration.
alien
and stuff.
registration card. Yeah.
Yeah. But we're almost at time, or we're actually over time. Before we go,
Mhm.
what is your parting? What do you want people to take away from this? Do you have any words of wisdom, any parting advice?
I guess, well, okay. So I try and speak for people who are learning Korean and people who are perhaps sort of who are on a similar path to me, I guess. At least with learning Korean, throughout my life, it's been kind of that one thing that I was good at, and I kind of sacrificed it for everything else. So I would spend all my time on Korean desperately, but at the cost of everything else, at the cost of all my other friendships. And looking back now, getting this good in Korean has been, good for my particular path in life. I wanted to go to Korea. And so if you're someone who wants to go to Korea and sees himself going there, then I think it's, a fair judgment to, maybe perhaps spend a bit more time on Korean, getting to that level where you want to be. But if you're someone who probably doesn't see themselves in Korea, is just kind of less serious about, getting to that top level, I think it's okay to not, it's okay to meet your friends, okay, and like be sociable. I think one thing that I kind of regret in some level is that I didn't level up any other part of myself. I only leveled up my Korean language ability. And this is something, like I said, it's good for people who are trying to get to where I am, but there's a lot of cost to doing that. And you want to be sure that you're weighing up your pros and cons, like exactly. So yeah, the takeaway is be sure that you're doing it for what you want to be doing it for. And if that's not the case, if you feel like you want to sort of reduce your Korean and just level up other parts of your life at the same time, I think that's totally a valid decision. So yeah, that's my takeaway.
All right. And George, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you very
And
much.
yeah, it was a great episode.
Yeah, I'm glad to have been on. So yeah, thank you very much for your time.
I want to thank you for listening to this episode of the Refold Podcast. If you're watching the live premiere, you're in luck. Right as it ends, we have an after party over on the Refold Central Discord server. Come join us by using refold.link/join and chat about the episode. If you enjoyed the podcast and would like to hear more, you can find older episodes to listen to on YouTube and Spotify. Let us know what you thought about the video by liking and leaving a comment below. Do you have suggestions for upcoming visitors or requests for particular topics? Please feel free to reach out to me on Discord at GeorgePig #5413 or via email at clayton@refold.la. Thank you all for watching and or listening, and I'll see you next week.